People usually imagine barbarians storming the city, collapsing legions, or emperors being poisoned inside marble palaces when they think about the fall of Rome. But empires do not collapse only because of outside threats. They rot from within. And one of the strongest forces that rots them from the inside is almost always money. If you think Rome collapsed only because of invasions, you are seriously mistaken. And it was not just corruption or incompetence either. One of the biggest blows was the collapse of its currency. And the interesting part is this: what happened back then still affects us today, and the same patterns still exist in modern economies. But before we get there, let's take a quick journey into history. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was a silver coin called the denarius. It was first minted around 211 BC and was made of almost pure silver. Across the empire, it was seen as reliable and valuable. Soldiers were paid with it, merchants wanted it, and ordinary people stored their savings in it. The denarius was not just a coin. It was the physical form of the people's trust in Rome. As long as Rome was strong, its money was strong too. But keeping a massive empire alive is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads had to be built, aqueducts needed construction, and wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was already starting to feel pressure on its borders. Germanic tribes, the Parthians in the east, and internal unrest were exhausting the empire. And when taxes stopped being enough, the emperors turned to an old trick: reducing the amount of precious metal inside the coins, because raising taxes would anger the people. Quietly lowering the value of the currency was easier, and the numbers tell the story perfectly. During the reign of Emperor Augustus, the denarius was around 95% pure silver, but by the 3rd century, under Emperor Caracalla, that number had fallen to around 50%. A few decades later, during the reign of Gallienus, it dropped below 5%. A coin that was once almost solid silver had become little more than a bronze disc with a thin silver coating. And people noticed. Then came inflation. Because the money was no longer backed by real value, wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. And this was not some abstract economic theory. It was destroying everyday life. Soldiers demanded higher wages because everything was getting more expensive. Merchants stopped trusting the debased coins. People slowly went back to barter because nobody trusted the currency anymore. And the more trust disappeared, the more worthless coins the state produced. It was a perfect vicious cycle. The same cycle we've seen in almost every major inflation crisis throughout history. This crisis reached its peak during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome lived through nearly 50 years of chaos. Invasions, plagues, civil wars. Emperors were overthrown or assassinated within months. But behind all the political chaos was something even deeper: a broken economy. Taxes were collected in coins that kept losing value. Farmers abandoned their land because crushing taxes made survival impossible. Trade networks were falling apart. The government desperately tried to hold the system together. Price controls were introduced. Forced labor obligations were imposed. But none of it worked. In 301 AD, Emperor Diocletian issued the famous Edict on Maximum Prices. The state fixed the prices of thousands of goods, from grain to workers' wages. Breaking the rules could even mean death. But the result was a disaster, because the real problem was not prices. The real problem was the money itself. Once the currency became worthless, laws could not save the economy. Black markets exploded, and official trade collapsed. People understood something very important: no law can repair broken money. Eventually, Rome was forced to abandon the denarius completely. Around 312 AD, Emperor Constantine introduced a new gold coin called the solidus. Unlike the denarius, it was stable and trustworthy. It restored some confidence and remained in use for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire. But for the Western Roman Empire, it was already too late. Because once the monetary system collapses, it is not only the economy that breaks apart. The backbone of the state begins to crack as well. Armies became harder to maintain. Trade collapsed. People stopped trusting the government. And the fall of Rome was never a single dramatic moment. It was a long, slow unraveling, and the collapse of its currency was one of the most important parts of that story. So what does all of this mean for us today? Simple. When money collapses, empires usually follow. People with coins that look the same but contain less real value. Modern governments often do something similar in different ways: printing money, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debt. But the outcome is usually the same. Ordinary people pay the price. Wealth disappears, and trust slowly dies. Rome learned this lesson the hard way, and history shows us that humanity keeps repeating the same mistakes because the story did not end with Rome. The same thing happened in Germany after World War I. Buried under massive war debts, the government kept printing money. By 1923, a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. People carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Families who spent their entire lives saving money suddenly became poor overnight. And the economic collapse fueled anger and extremism across society. We all know what came after that. Zimbabwe repeated the same story in the early 2000s. The government printed money to deal with debt and economic problems. The result? One of the worst hyperinflation crises in modern history. Prices were doubling almost daily. Eventually, people abandoned their own currency and started using US dollars instead. And that is the frightening part of history. The names change. The system stays the same. Even today, we can still see modern versions of this pattern, especially after 1971, when the United States abandoned the gold standard and the world fully entered the era of fiat currency, money backed not by gold, but by trust. And from that point on, debt expanded, money supply exploded, and inflation became a permanent part of life. Maybe people today are not carrying cash in wheelbarrows, but purchasing power is still slowly disappearing. What $1 could buy in 1971 now takes more than $6 to buy. The money looks the same, but inside, it has been hollowed out. And the dangerous part is this. Today, this system does not. Today, this system does not affect just one empire or one country. Rome's crisis was imperial. Weimar Germany's crisis was national. Zimbabwe's crisis was local. But today, the entire world runs on debt, central banks, and endlessly expanding monetary systems, which means the next major crisis would not stay local. It would be global. So what should ordinary people learn from all of this? First, inflation is rarely an accident. Most of the time, it is policy. Second, real wealth is not just numbers on a screen. Land, production, skills, and real assets matter far more during unstable times. Third, never assume stability lasts forever. Romans in the first century never imagined their currency would one day become worthless. Neither did Germans in 1913. Neither did Zimbabweans in the 1980s. But all of them eventually saw the same ending, because monetary systems usually collapse slowly, then suddenly. And when trust disappears, it is not just the economy that begins to fall apart. Society itself starts to crack. Contracts lose meaning. Trade breaks down. Armies weaken. Governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gates may deliver the final blow, but the real collapse usually begins inside the treasury. And maybe the most important point of all is this. History does not repeat itself perfectly, but if you fail to understand it, it can still crush you. The Roman currency crisis was never just the story of bad emperors. It was the story of how fragile money becomes when power is left unchecked. And that fragility never truly disappeared. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it wasn't destroyed in a day either. What brought down emperors wasn't the swords of barbarians, but the small coins they melted down with their own hands. Are the pieces of paper in our pockets or the numbers on our screens any safer than Rome's golden solidus? History repeats itself for those who don't learn. Until we meet again at the same time every day, farewell with science and truth.